Well, I met Suzuki Roshi at a time in my life when I had just discovered that I personally am going to die. You know, it never occurred to me. You know, well, sure. I mean, I was 40 or something. Oh yeah, everybody dies later. You know. And then suddenly, my best friend had a really bad headache. So bad she went to the doctor the next day. Was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. Went into a coma within a week or two that she never recovered from. You know, I thought, oh my God, we're the same age. We've got little kids that played together all the time. Oh, I'm gonna die. Suddenly it got very personal. And I thought, how do you live if you know you're gonna die? Who knows that? And so I started reading a lot of stuff I'd never read before, including somebody gave me a Zen book, and somebody told me about the Zendo in Berkeley, and I went there for meditation instruction, and something about it just, I started sitting every day from that day that I had July 3rd, 1969. I remember the day. Because I went away for the weekend on a camping trip. I sat Zazen by the side of a stream up in the Sierra. I started getting up every morning and going to Zazen before I went to work. And then stopping on the way home and going to Zazen before I went home. My kids didn't see me till, luckily my husband was at home. Because I was desperate to find out how to live if you know you're going to die. And Suzuki Roshi at that time would come and give a Dharma talk at the Berkeley Zendo from time to time, come over from San Francisco. Actually, by later on, he had ordained, he had encouraged 3 different people to open up sitting groups near where they were, and he went down and gave a talk every week. He went down to Palo Alto or Los Altos, and he went to Berkeley, and he went to Sausalito, and he gave 2 lectures a week at Sokoji Temple in Japan, in San Francisco's Japanese community temple, Japanese American community temple, and still to this day I cannot imagine getting 5 Dharma talks a week. You know? But he was very interested in people. He just came to be the priest of the local Japanese American community temple, you know. But people heard about him, and you know, it was the '60s. It was people were interested in the beat poets and stuff, and so there was a lot of interest in the idea of Zen. But he got invited to give a talk at the East-West Center at somebody's class, and some people asked him, well, can you teach us more about Zen? And he said, well, I sit Zazen every morning. You can come and sit with me if you like. And that's how Zen Center began. That's how his teaching of Americans began. But it sort of took over all of his time. He was much more interested in teaching Zazen to people who were going to actually practice than he was in being the than he was in being, you know, what a priest in a temple like that is supposed to do is help carry the culture of like of Japan into the next generation, and to do more with the kids and with Sunday school and traditional ceremonies and celebrations and stuff, to keep the whole culture, not just Zazen. And at some point they said, you know, you've got to make a choice between, because also particularly the young people who were coming in and practicing with him were, you know, they'd finish a one-day sitting and then they'd go get stoned. you know, that kind of thing, because that's the time it was. That's what culture was happening in San Francisco at the time. But his interest went to those who were interested in Zazen. And but for the Japanese American community, we didn't know anything about the culture, and so we were just sort of taking over their space and we're not being polite in the way that they understood polite, you know. It wasn't any kind of deliberate not being polite. It's just that we didn't pay enough attention to the culture of the community. Anyhow, at some point they asked Suzuki Roshi to make a choice between the Americans he was sitting Zazen with, or the community who invited him to be there have it. And he decided to go with the Americans who sit Zazen. But once I met him, my impression of him, he knows what I need to know about how to live if you know you're going to die, you know. So I started going over to San Francisco every time he did a talk, and practicing with the Berkeley community every day, and going over to do one day. He did a sort of a half-day sitting every Saturday morning, and so I went there for a whole carloads of us went from the Berkeley Zendo there for those kinds of things. And then the group he talked with in Los Altos, the person who was hostessing that in her house, just had an ordinary little tape recorder and recorded on cassettes, his talks, and then she transcribed them all. And then this Trudy Dixon that was mentioned in the ceremony here edited them all and put them together into Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which is still in print. I think in 14 languages now, or something like that. So it's affected many, many people's lives. And then we got this monastery, this old hot springs that was on the market that we bought in a great location down in the mountains, just like you see the scrolls of Japanese, particularly Chinese scrolls of monasteries or temples sort of hidden in some little canyon somewhere or up in the mountains somewhere. It's pretty much like that. It's down. It's in the mountain valley. It's one road, unpaved still, and so it's quite isolated and a good place to do monastic practice. But he was very generous, People said, "Oh, but you can't close the hot springs. We've been coming here since we were kids." And so he said, okay, we'll do our monastic practice in the wintertime when nobody wants to be here. And we'll let guests come in for the hot springs in the summertime, and the students will take care of the guests, and that will be their practice. They'll get up in the morning, sit Zazen, and take care of the guests, and then sit Zazen and go to bed. So, So we did that, and it turned out that was very helpful because it helped us to pay off the mortgage on the hot spring. It brought in some cash from the. I think of the guests as Tassajara donors, And then, so we were cooking for all these people and baking. There was no bakery, there's no bread. So if we wanted bread, we had to make it. And Ed Brown, one of his students, wrote the Tassajara bread book, which actually turned out, it was really a major influence in the whole 60s turning toward artisanal breads. it's a very good writer and a very good baker. And he wrote about it from the point of view as a monk working with these materials, you know. And, I see it everywhere I go, you know. I was just down in West Virginia and somebody had taught our bread book.
And is that where you are now still? Are you still at that monastery?
I'm not at the monastery. We have the San Francisco Zen Center has a city center where people can live there and work at the city center for a Zen Center. What this running the guest season did was sort of show us that there was a way that a person could support themselves as a monk that we could afford to do. So the people who worked for Zen Center, either cooking or keeping things in repair, or there's an accounting office and that sort of thing. Or teaching, or just following the monastic schedule, can support themselves at a very minimal level, room, board, tuition, and a small stipend. And then we added paying Social Security and health insurance. You can't save up for any legacy for your children, but you can actually practice quite regularly with a sangha, with a community and a teacher, and that's turned out to be a great boon to a lot of people. And people can come and go as well, and just pay for being there if they want to do a practice period. Let's say 3 months at Tassajara. If they got a regular job, they can pay. That's what I did at first. I had a regular job, and I just paid for the practice period. But I thought I was going to Tassajara for 3 months, but in fact, I've never lived in my house since. I still own the house. I thought if I sell the house, the kids are not going to get a dime when I die. So I'll just keep the house, rent it out, and they'll have something. Luckily, my husband was interested in sitting zazen too. So Suzuki Roshi said, "It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes wife begins to sit, husband gets jealous like she had a new boyfriend." So because of that, he was very encouraging to people who were not sure of themselves. For instance, me, everybody was mostly the age of my kids, and there were only a handful of us who were over 40, and so I was kind of uncertain about whether it was all right for me to do this. But he was very encouraging. When I got to thinking I was doing something, then he would get a little more strict, you say. I remember one time I sat a one-day sitting, and at that time I was working on trying to count my breaths. It's a way of helping to keep your attention on breath instead of having it runs off and you bring it back. But breath is always happening in the present moment, so you can learn to bring your energy to the present moment, your attention, by counting breath to start with. And then just watching it and noticing when you wander off into breath. But anyhow, I had been trying to count my breath, and I had, it's amazing that you can't count to 10, but often you can't count to 10 before your thoughts take you out the window and down the road. But this one day sitting, I was counting my breath again. I thought, wow. And I went to see Suzuki Roshi in private interview, Dokusan would call it. And I said, "Roshi, I can count my breath now. I counted every breath. What do I do now?" And suddenly, instead of being just sweet and encouraging, like, when I first went, he said, "Well, it's because of the sincerity of your practice that your husband can join you." This time he said, don't ever think that you can sit zazen. That's a big mistake. Zazen sits zazen. You know, there's no you there to be sitting. You know. Anyhow, I felt very chastised and left around the feeling. So he was kind of like that. Those people who were feeling uncertain or unsure or timid, he would be very encouraging to. And those people who think they're great guns, he would, down puppy. Or the same people were sometimes one way and sometimes another, but he found a way to keep us back on the track and not wandering off into our own ideas. He talked a lot about no gaining idea, not to sit zazen in order to get something. It's more just being yourself, completely and fully, Like he would say, when you are you, Zen is Zen. Is one thing I remember him saying. When you become you yourself, then that's that. Not something, not adding anything. You don't need to add anything. I mean, really the teaching is you're already complete. We were born with Buddha nature. We were born with the nature of awakening. But we don't recognize it. And the Dharma is about recognizing that you have the complete capacity to see the complete interconnection and interpenetration of this being and all beings. That we're not separate. We're all one in a very real way. And his job as a teacher was to help us see that for ourselves. And in my view, he was quite good at that. And I met Ryumon when she began to practice at Zen Center. As a matter of fact, my husband, she says, is the one who gave her zazen instruction. He did a lot of zazen instruction. He liked to do that. And so we became friends, and as a matter of fact, she was on the board at Zen Center, and I remember one board meeting. We were down at Tassajara for a board meeting, and she said, she had been working on, let's see, I'm not sure about the timing, but she edited a book called Dharma, Culture, and Color. And at this board meeting, she was sitting to my right, as I recall, at the corner, so I was looking at her. She said, "Where are the teachers of color?" And I said, "Well, maybe you'll have to be one." And now she is. Isn't that great? But she's first and foremost a teacher. That she is of color is encouraging to other people of color. This practice could work for me too. So that's great. But the fact is, it's kind of delicate in here. I mean, to see her as a whole person who happens to be a person of color and a Dharma teacher, rather than to see her as a teacher of color, I think is very important to her. And I think very important. But in fact, she becomes a gateway for other people of color to practice, which I think is wonderful.
And what are your thoughts about the two streams? I mean, I heard we have your thoughts, but this whole idea of these.
Well, I think it's quite exciting that the two of them hit it off so well, and they're very complementary. Both. Well, I find most couples I know are, we generally are attracted to and choose a partner whose strong points match our weak points. You know, they've got these skills that I don't see in myself, and so they're very attractive to us for that reason. Or, you know, one's an introvert and one's an extrovert, or one's an optimist and one's a pessimist. There were all those kinds of differences between me and my husband. We were married 63 years, so the marriage worked out pretty well. And I remember my mother and dad, they were very, very different. And my sister and her husband were very, in these kinds of ways of being introvert, extrovert, or poet. My husband was very poetic. I can't, you know, I was very practical and he was very poetic. Stuff like that. And I think they have kind of matching qualities in that way, where one has, you know, this is stronger and the other is not as strong in one aspect, and then a different quality might be quite, yeah, you know. I think that's what makes special friendship special, is that kind of complementarity, and I think they have that. And I think Maizumi Roshi's lineage and Suzuki Roshi's lineage had also some differences in the way they were strong and developed, and less strong and less developed. Bernie Glassman, who was, I think, the first person to whom Maizumi Roshi gave Dharma transmission, was just telling me that Maizumi Roshi had kind of wanted to combine the two, Los Angeles and San Francisco Zen Center, but the person who was the second abbot of Zen Center, you know, he was president of the board at that time, very strong student of Suzuki Roshi's. He didn't apparently support that. It's interesting, you know, how some little something like that could have changed the history of Zen in America. Because both lineages are very strong.
And do you see the lineage themselves as complementary? I heard you say that.
Some aspects, yeah. I mean, it's, I'm not going into that kind of detail.
That's okay. Yeah. I think we're doing a 3-minute video.
Yeah.
I think, unless
you think you've got enough material there?
I do, although we might have to make our own video out of you.
So, I'm trying to think. You know, we have someone who has a website that's, God knows how many bytes it is, and is still collecting stuff. So there's a lot of information on Suzuki Roshi. Cute.com. My memories are just my own personal experiences. But the thing is that I want people to know about Suzuki Roshi is what a confidence he had that every one of us has the capacity to wake up completely. It's not like, you know, some people have blue eyes and some people have brown eyes. It's like we're all Buddha. We all have the capacity to wake up, you know, and it's our natural inheritance, you know, as human beings. And he just wanted to encourage people to understand that they could make a big difference in the world by how they conduct their life. And I think that all of religion is about how do we live this precious human life. So it's not surprising that, there are quite great similarities, for example, in the Ten Commandments, which, were handed down from on high according to Scripture, and the 10 precepts that were not sort of handed down by a deity, but grew out of intelligent human beings looking closely at how we live and saying, I think we shouldn't do that. That seems to be always harmful. I think of the precepts sort of like, when a pond freezes over and people ice skate on it, they sometimes put a marker where the ice is thin. Be careful here, a lot of trouble could happen. I think that's what the specific precepts are about. Be careful in the realm of false speech. A lot of suffering happens there. Be careful in the realm of how you use this powerful sexuality that's been given to us in order to reproduce. Be careful how you use it, because a lot of suffering occurs there. That's what I think the specific precepts are like. They're saying these are places where a lot of harm can occur, so be awake. Maybe that's enough.
Thank you.
You're certainly welcome.